Well, good evening or good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. So this talk is about Peergos and custom apps specifically. So building end-to-end encrypted peer-to-peer apps without trying. I guess be warned, there will be code snippets. But before that, I'll introduce the vision. So our vision at Peergos is to build a private web where end users are in control of their data. So Picos offers the peer-to-peer connectivity, the end-to-end encryption, fine-grained access control, strong metadata protection, and it's all open source and self-hostable. Now, this is all built on a global file system where people have total control over all their own data. That is necessary, but not sufficient. The ability for people to extend the platform to add custom functionality is where we think innovation is. So with custom apps, we realize the private web. Okay, so who am I? I'm Kevin O'Dwyer. I'm a co-founder and R&D engineer. I'm the only, we're a team of 4 co-founders. I'm the only one who doesn't have an advanced degree in physics or maths.
Oh, Kevin, do you have a Twitter handle? Because I'm going to live tweet some stuff at you.
No, I'm afraid I don't. Just use the Peergos one.
Right. I'll use the pointer. If I'm live tweeting, how do I point to Peergos? Wait, it's an interoperability problem.
Yeah. Okay, so I've been a software engineer for 20 years. It feels like a lot longer. I grew up in a generation of 8-bit computers. So in my case, it was Commodore 64, and taught myself to program as a graphics programmer in the demo scene. So way back when. Now we'll introduce some of my previous work because it actually dovetails nicely into this project. So if I get to the next slide, I wrote JS PC emulator over a decade ago. So this was the world's first full x86 emulator. It was a port of JPC, which was written by none other than Ian Preston, who is the driving force behind Peergos. As in the screenshots, you will see a graphical Linux, in this case, basic Linux running Joe Window Manager, and also Secret of Monkey Island running in DOS. So that was a big thing way back then. It actually predated JS Linux, as I said. Okay, then I worked on JS DOSBox. So this was the first emulator where you could run Doom in the browser, and also Future Crew's Second Reality and Alex Evans' 64K paper demo, amongst a lot of other things. More recently, I've worked on BoxedWine, which is an emulator capable of running 32-bit Windows binaries, again, in the browser. So you see Age of Empires, desktop applications, including Abbey Word for a full word processor experience. Now, I guess the common theme in here is running arbitrary user-controlled code in the browser, and that is exactly what a custom app is. So Peergos does actually have a lot of apps already, and we use dog fooding to validate our approach and our API, and that's what I'll go on to explain today. So I'll just go through some of these existing apps that we have that prove the work that we've done so far. So I've got a calendar. We have this social feed to display a timeline of content that has been shared with you. We have to-do, task list, Kanban board, and we've got editors for Markdown, viewing PDF files, and for doing for media viewing. So in this case, streaming videos. And that's actually an interesting case because a lot of the technology we developed to stream and seek videos in the browser is very core to how we do sandboxing and custom apps in Peergos. So that in mind, I'll move on to Peergos custom apps. And what we're doing is essentially serving up arbitrary HTML. Well, sorry, I've got 2 more. So I've got chat and email. So now we get to custom apps. So again, we have Doom. So you can serve up arbitrary HTML, CSS, JavaScript within Peergos, and got Doom, a sky map application I originally wrote for mobile way back when, ported that to JavaScript. Now, some more, I guess, apps which you would have seen before. So to do MVC, this is often used to validate web frameworks. So about a dozen lines of changes. I managed to get that to run in Peergos, and I will actually walk you through those changes in a couple of slides. Have an image editor.
Can I ask one question, Kevin?
Yes.
So serving arbitrary JavaScript and HTML is sort of like just the ability to serve a file to the browser, right?
It's a little bit more.
Yeah. What does it make? What is a Peergos app beyond that?
Okay, that's coming up very quickly, but essentially all the resources are in Peergos itself. So we're serving it from within Peergos, and which means that all the work is done on the client, all the decryption, all the permissions checking, and so forth. So I'll go into a bit more detail on a couple of slides, but yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and yes, thank you for that. Okay, so image editor, word processor, and Winamp, which is a JavaScript implementation of Winamp 2. So I guess, yeah, in history, nothing is new. So many years ago, both Dropbox and Google Drive allowed and supported hosting static websites. And everyone on this call has probably used various JavaScript playgrounds linked to Stack Overflow answers. And you may even use some of those online IDEs as part of your daily work. So this is a little bit different. I guess what the thing that makes it a big deal is that there is no backend. Everything that is consequential happens in the client. So that's your encryption, your decryption, permissions checking, everything like that. And why are apps important? Well, it just makes everything so much more useful. So when PCs got software, it resulted in a lot more PCs around. When capable phones arrived, emergence of apps drove further adoption. We're hoping the same thing will happen with Peergos. Okay, so this is where I get into some of the technicals. So the requirements is, it's important to remember that in an end-to-end and peer-to-peer network like Peergos, the server is not trusted. So the stakes are high. If you lose your private keys, then it's game over. So each app must live in its own separate OS process. You must stop any external requests which could be used to exfiltrate data, and you need to enforce a permission system to guard app behavior. So, okay, now we get to the implementation.
If you're in the browser, do you actually have control over whether you're in the same OS process?
Yes, so that's the second bit in this slide here. So the window cross origin isolated, you can check that to see if you are actually a separate OS process. I think Ian might be able to say a bit more to actually confirm that, but that's my understanding. All right. Okay, so we use a standard iframe inside of an iframe. That seems to be what a lot of these code plugins use, and it works perfectly fine. I guess we have a unique app domain, so that's that SHA-256 of the app path, the first part of after HTTPS. Which also means you don't share cookies, local storage databases, so forth. And then an important part of it is the content security policy. Now that's a big chunk in itself. There's lots and lots of different policies. I guess the three that are mentioned there are pretty new, and they're very important to actually lock down a sandbox. Okay, I should point out that there are actually limits with what's possible with current browsers. So for example, DNS prefetch and web RTC CSP directives aren't actually implemented in all the browsers yet, which is a bit annoying. And the last one there is service worker and writable stream. So that's what we used to take control of the request response flow. We intercept requests, do some validation, permissions checking, and so forth. So what do we get? We get the private web. So with the above in place, you can serve up your own personal website. You simply take a static website, upload it to Peergos, and Bob's your uncle. But what makes the web hyperlinks? So if you start an absolute URL with /Peergos, that allows you to navigate to any other person's website within Peergos itself. And you have the usual access control system in Picos, which is totally respected. but websites are not apps. Resource retrieved are only GET requests. So this is where I start talking about the API. So this is /Peergos-API and the version of the API, the actual API, and the resource.
Oh, one more clarification, Kevin. So when you said you start the URI with Peergos, that means Peergos in place of HTTP is that it's a protocol essentially?
No, so in a HTML file, if you want to, I guess, link to another someone else's website within Picos, you just start the URL with /Peergos.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. All right. So I've got an example there of a API call to data, which means retrieve app data. We'll get to what that means, but essentially you identify the API and then the path to the resource. We support get, post, put, delete, and patch. Only append for patch at the moment. We then have permissions. So at the moment we've got about 4. I've listed 2 there, but we also have permissions for reading contents of a folder, modifying a file chosen by a user. And the last one is the app manifest. So that's like a mobile phone manifest. It describes the app, describes the associations. So for example, should the app launch for image files? Should it for document files? Is it a folder, action? And as well as that, you also need to specify the app permissions, and which have to be agreed upon before you can install the app. Okay, so now we get to the app anatomy. So all files for the app exist underneath assets, and the other file in the left-hand screenshot is Picos.json. So that's the manifest file, and down the bottom you can see an example of what that looks like. It's just a JSON file that indicates, I guess, some metadata, but crucially, the file mapping. So in this case, file extensions. So this is for viewing HTML files, and it has permission of edit chosen file. So you can actually edit the file as well. And the way you install it is once it's uploaded into Peergos, you just go to the context menu for Peergos/app.json and go install app. You can actually call run app as well. So that allows you to just have a fast cycle of run, edit, debug, whatever, just a nice tight loop. Okay, now we'll get to actually some apps and code. So sorry, this is a little bit busy, but this is a very simple app that demonstrates a thumbnail gallery. So this is an app that's a folder action, and it has a file association of images. So in the index HTML, you just search the URLs. Sorry, you go to the retrieve the URL search parameters for path, and that gives you the folder path that you clicked on. You call fetch, and assuming you get 200 status code back, you decode the response, and you'll get this JSON format of files and subfolders. And from that, you can call get again with the folder path and the file name, and question mark preview equals true. And what that will do is return the thumbnail for that image, and then you can just set the image source to that text, and it'll appear on the screen. Okay, so that's a very simple app. Next one is a Markdown Editor. So this is for an app with a file mapping for Markdown files. In the top right-hand corner, again, we get the path. You can also get the theme as well. So if Peergos is running in dark mode, you can actually figure that out and apply that to your app. And then I've got a get request in order to get the contents of the file, and a put request to save the contents of the file. If it auto saves, or if you have to press the save button in the toolbar. Okay, moving along to to-do MVC. So originally, this was an example I found on the internet. They used local storage for storing their to-do items, and it was really 10 lines of code, and I changed it to use Picos to store the to-do items. So as you can see here, I'm calling the API with Peergos-API v0 data, and the local storage key, which is just a random key, calling get, and I just code whatever the response is, and in the other direction, I call put in order to save the to-do items to Picos. Okay, now next one's a little bit more involved. So what we're talking about here is a sample that demonstrates exercising the chat API. So this is the same chat API that's used by the Peergos chat application. This could be used for developing a multiplayer game. Essentially, you save the state of the game in the chat messages. So you have two players. Alice creates the game, and Bob joins the game. So when the call is made, the form data is created, you set the title, you set the number of people you want to invite, and you call the post method on Peergos API v0 chat. And as part of that, Peergos will launch a add friends to app modal, and you can invite whoever you want to the application. Now, crucial thing here is that's privileged code. So the app itself doesn't know your social graph. It only, but once the chat channel is created, what gets returned is the chat ID. Now, Bob can go to his social feed and he will see an invitation to join the app. So that's what's in the bottom right-hand corner. Okay, so chat number 2. So there's essentially 2 actions you want to do. One is to retrieve messages in the chat channel. So that's the top code. You just pass in some paging parameters and the chat API endpoint, and you'll get back all the messages. And the bottom one is to add a chat message. So that should be all pretty straightforward. And as I said, in this case, it's for a chess game. So the messages are move a queen to e5, move a rook to f3, move a pawn to d5, and so forth. So it's a nice way to write multiplayer games using existing functionality. Okay, so talk a
Is
bit
that
about
chat channel scoped to a application, to a user, to users that user knows who use the same application?
Okay, it's bound to the application, and it's bound. The only people who you can invite are your friends.
Okay, so it is the people who have the same application who are also connected to you.
Yes, they don't have to have it at the time you invite them, but yes, they obviously have to have it installed in order to use it.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, just a little bit about compatibility. So Chrome, yeah, it all runs fine. I develop in Chrome. I find it very easy to debug. In Firefox, you can, but you have to. Well, sorry, I should say that in the development version of Firefox, it's all fine. If you use just the standard Firefox, you have to enable writable streams. There's been a bug open for 4 years. I don't know why they haven't enabled it by default, but yeah, it's annoying. Safari, there's actually 2 blocking bugs. There's not much we can do about it at the moment. So one of those is around, I guess, if you want to run Picos over localhost, it just doesn't like it. And also with their writable streams, well, service worker and writable streams together, there's a few issues. Yeah, so hopefully there's movement on that. Like at the start of this year, they did actually fix a few bugs, so we could actually do streaming in Safari. But yes, for sandboxing, it's not quite there. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say as part of my introduction. So I've got a link to the tech book. I've got a link to the GitHub repo with some example apps. I encourage you, if you think this is interesting, to sign up for an account. And also we accept donations as well. Okay, questions?
What is the update story if a developer wants to change the code to an app?
Okay, so yes, we do support versions. You can, we allow you to increase the version number, and we also allow you to install an older version as well. In terms of getting automatic updates, no, we don't do that yet. That needs to be streamlined. Also, if you receive an invite to an app, that is not seamless at the moment. There's no easy way well, okay, we just haven't implemented, but we can make that more seamless. At the moment, it's a bit of a fiddle.
So what do you have to control to update an app? A Peergos username and password, or some kind of separate developer identity?
Okay, so you need a Picos account, obviously, but the app is just some files in a directory. It's nothing more than that. So you just upload them anywhere into Peergos. When you install them, install the app, it just gets copied into a hidden directory within Peergos. And so it's just to, it's a hidden folder, so it doesn't get touched.
So these apps, they're like arbitrary files that just run on the user's computer locally?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So it's almost like a Unix file system.
Yes, you can view Peergos as a global file system. Just it's encrypted. But this is, I guess, a layer above that. So
Okay.
yeah.
It uses internal identity system.
We have our own API and all that. So I did a talk at FOSDEM back in February. So I go into some of the details there, and we have various blog posts on how that all works.
Are there any plans to get the identity system to interoperate with other identity systems, like third-party identities and such?
It sounds like a very good idea. That's something I guess Ian can talk more to. I know enough about crypto that I'll probably mess it up, so I'm quite happy to leave those things to Ian.
Yeah, it would be very nice if people could just use their pre-existing identities and integrate them together.
Yeah,
especially decentralized identities of some kind.
Which pre-existing identities?
Maybe Solid or Matrix or something like that. Just if we eventually come up with some sort of standard amongst the like an IETF standard or something for identities, that would be ideal, right? Because we want identity to become more universal between different protocols, right? So the idea would be to have a way of extending that and externalizing the identity system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if like Peergos already uses cryptographic curves, which mean you could just use your like ED25511 key as the identity, and so it may already be interoperable with things like Matrix.
Maybe. I'd just like to see how far we could push it, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, Ian or Kev, is that true?
Yeah.
Like, is a crypto?
That all makes sense to me. The algorithms we use are all standard stuff. You mentioned Curve 25519, whatever. So we use all the web crypto stuff we can, and where we can't, we use Tweetnacle JS.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
So yeah, your Peergos identity may already be like serializable as a DID key.
That would be fantastic.
We haven't quite gone that far, but potentially you could integrate.
Yeah, so we could start using DIDs or what's the other one? It's what's it called? They have the. I'm blanking on it at the moment.
So one thing we're careful about in the protocol is avoiding any dependence on DNS or the TLS certificate authorities. So this would make it difficult to interoperate with identities that are based on that, because they wouldn't have the security guarantees that we need. I mean, in terms of our identities, it's basically your identity is a username which you claim once. And there's a PKI which just maps your username to two public keys. One is your identity public key, and the other one is it's the identity public key of your home server, basically. And you can change those.
I was just wondering about like integration with like a Solid or DIDs or that sort of thing, because if we can basically externalize the identity process, then that makes it much easier for people to sign up and use different systems, such as yours.
Yeah,
your system, which is fantastic. By the way, I love the architecture.
My understanding of Solid is it does depend on DNS. DIDs are better, but I think we still have a dependency in the service endpoint, which.
Okay.
I mean, some of the DIDs are better than others.
This is the other problem: is there is no,
there's no standard identity yet. Right.
But for example,
so if we can make our identity systems extensible, then whenever we do get an identity system, right, then we can just integrate it.
So for example, we did talk a lot with the Ion guys, and so the PKI is designed to be basically compatible with that, insofar as the only reason you need the PKI is to provide an ordering of these claims, in case two people try and claim the same thing. So we've gone with using a consensus group of servers to achieve that, which is obviously much faster, but also less decentralized. Whereas Ion puts it in Bitcoin, and that's fully decentralized but much slower.
I've also seen you around the IPFS space. Do you use that in the background?
Yeah, built on top of IPFS.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I think that's all my questions.
The consensus group doing the ordering for identity, that's some Byzantine fault-tolerant thing, or you just like doing Paxos?
At the moment, it's just consensus, yeah.
Which consensus?
So the idea is it can be a group of servers. At the moment, it's literally one server, but yeah, something like Raft or Paxos would be fine.
So the current algorithm is I'm one server. I just do the update locally.
For the PKI, yes.
I guess it is mirrored on each server as well.
And I assume that means I can change my password without needing to change my identity. Will my key change if I change my password?
So you can change your password. That used to involve the PKI, but it doesn't anymore. So those are distinct. You can change your identity independently of changing your password.
But my key is derived from my identity and my password. No? So
it's a little bit more involved. So when you log in, it's derived from your username. There's basically a salt and your password. And when you log in, that goes through script, and you end up with an authentication. Two things: an authentication key pair, a signing key pair, and a symmetric key. And you use the authentication key pair to retrieve an encrypted blob from the server. And that is the thing that then, when you decrypt it with a symmetric key, then you end up with your actual identity key pair and a few other things.
That sounds to me like you would need to talk to the identity server in order to rotate your password. No?
No, that's just you just need to talk to your home server.
I see. So the thing that's being stored at the identity server is who is your home, and then your home has your actual, these are your keys encrypted to you.
Sorry, there's two things. So the identity has, the PKI has your identity public key and your server's public key. And the thing you generate to log in is a separate key pair, which you use to authenticate with your home server to retrieve the stuff that you then decrypt to get your identity key pair, which is the one in the PKI. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
I'll just butt in and say that the FOSDEM talk I did a few months ago has a couple of nice diagrams, so that might clear it up.
It's a bit awkward. without
Yes,
the
I
diagrams.
will watch that.
I think we're all very interested in the guts of this thing.
What about the other, like the rest of sort of like what Ian and Kev you say about like the application of the solid app ecosystem to the app ecosystem you're describing, like including like I think I heard Ian mention that some of solid might depend on DNS. I don't know if that's like entirely true, especially outside of like the web ID part or whatever of solid. I think that's a lot of times it's based on URL, but not necessarily DNS URI.
Okay.
It tries to use as many standards as possible, given the traditional internet infrastructure. I mean, Tim Berners-Lee is behind it, but I don't think one necessarily depends on it. It's more that people tend to use DNS, so if you have a DNS URL, then you need to use DNS.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just identifying like maybe there's potential for this Peergos app ecosystem to intersect a bit with the solid app ecosystem, especially.
That would be great, especially because these things both use file system metaphors. So one uses content-based addressing, and the other one would use the URL-based addressing. But I could see how they could potentially integrate.
Yeah, I mean, like you can make URIs that are content addressing by using like the
Exactly.
URI scheme or something like. But I feel like that's still compatible with solid in a lot of ways.
Yeah, once we have standard content and location-based addressing, and like a standard identity system, and then something like Peergos, we've effectively solved this DWeb problem.
Is it Web 6?
As a person in the terminology group, I do not recognize Web 6. It's the DWeb, decentralized web, right? It's private, it's secure, it's no single entity control, right? No, what we ultimately want is portable identities, communities that don't lock us into a particular application, so that I can use one messaging service, the other person can use another one, and it doesn't really matter anymore, right? The end of platforms.
When you say terminology group, is that like a tongue-in-cheek? Is that a joke or is that a real group?
I actually am part of the D. So the Blue Sky group has a terminology group, and I run that once a week, usually around this time.
Cool. Thanks for coming.
I have a Markdown link. I need to put it up on GitHub, but we have a lexicon built up. So.
You're just underestimating Web 5. It's going to be big as IPv5 was.
Oh my god. I mean, So you said that you said that in the system that there are no trusted servers, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Well,
So
it's self-certifying, so the data, you can use that to verify itself.
okay. Right. So you don't need to, even in the first place. It's a very cheap, just get a verification mechanism. So.
Yeah, so the global file system, we took inspiration from something called crypttree. So that's a folder tree structure for cryptographic file systems. It was an academic paper from about 15 years ago. We
I
added
think
to
I
it.
might have spotted that if I haven't read it. But.
Yeah, it's a very good paper. Took me a few reads to understand it, and we did extend it so that paper didn't go so much into protecting metadata, but that's obviously
Okay.
important to us. So
How resilient are your metadata protections?
sorry, can you say that again?
How resilient are your metadata protections?
I'm still not grabbing that. Sorry, I think I've got a terrible microphone.
Okay, I was wondering like, how resilient your protections on metadata are. Like, are there any leaks? Yeah.
Okay, so the network can't see things like file sizes, the difference between a file and a folder. It can't see who a file or a folder is shared with. It can't see the size of directories, the size of files. So most things you care about.
All right, so pretty much everything.
Pretty much everything, yeah.
Yeah.
And we also did some work at a lower level. So I guess IPFS, as you know, everything's public.
Yes.
Which is not terribly great.
Which is a problem, but like they got some good bones there.
Yeah, so obviously at rest, everything's encrypted for us, but also, and Ian can speak to this, we've added another layer where when you request something over IPFS, it makes sure that you do actually have access to it.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically there's an independent authorization layer at the block level, which makes the blocks not public. And
that makes sense.
And that scheme.
This is the BAT tokens that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the BAT thing, and the authentication is the same authentication that S3 uses, which has a nice bonus that it's post-quantum already. So even if someone has a quantum computer right now, they still can't get the ciphertext.
Right, so you're full-on post-quantum crypto, huh?
We certainly
their symmetric keys are still elliptic curve.
Yeah.
We care about it a lot. Many of us are ex-physicists.
Great.
And so,
perfect.
Yeah, I mean, right now, unshared files are already safe from exposure by a quantum computer. Shared files, because of the way we do follow requests, if someone has a quantum computer right now, then they would be vulnerable. But a future quantum computer, it's actually already not vulnerable to. With the there's a clause there. Unless someone is manning, not quite manning the middling, but logging your traffic to your server when you send the follow.
Oh, so they have to be Eve when everything gets set up with a quantum computer.
Correct. Yes. And yeah, well, as soon as there's a clear candidate, we'll upgrade both the key.
I think there has been some recent news where they've like set up a few.
Yeah, we saw that. We're probably going to wait for a bit more consensus from the community.
I would agree with that decision. Wait 6 months maybe.
Yeah.
So if I'm editing one of these apps, I basically just edit it on my local file system and then upload all the files that define the app?
Yes, that's correct. One of the things I'd love to do, but I haven't got around to it, is actually to run Node.js inside Peergos. So there's already a few open source projects that have been doing that, and they've been doing it for a couple of years. But in that instance, yeah, it's not just HTML, and a couple static, just single JS files. You can have a proper large React, Vue, whatever application, and you just upload that and run Node locally.
Okay.
So what would that environment look like? POSIX?
I would assume so, yeah. And we would just implement the file system and maybe some kind of callback.
Everything is secretly Linux. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I imagine you don't plan to go so far as emulating an x86 processor in JavaScript so that you can install Linux on top.
No.
Not quite that far, but I have a sample app where I'm running.
How about WASM support?
Yeah, it already has WASM support. So when
Excellent.
I mentioned Boxwine, so I've already got an example where you're running AbiWord as a rich text editor. That works perfectly fine. It just takes 40 seconds to load, so that's not great.
Right, the load times are ouch.
Yeah, so it's the same thing with LibreOffice. So they've got a WASM build of that, but unfortunately, it's currently about 160 meg. So you don't want to bring down 160 meg just to open up a word processor.
No.
But actually, one of the original use cases we designed Peergos for is for storing VM disk images. So, like, I'd love to be able to be running a VM from Peergos directly. Just run a NixOS VM
inside of Peergos,
and then go to another country and then log in, and it's all there. No need to worry about customs and all that stuff.
Okay. Interesting.
If I start using Peergos with a terrible password, and then at some point I switch to a good password, but someone's been like from back when I had a terrible password, do they have any ability to see stuff that happened after I switched to a good password? Or
No.
does that make sense as a question?
Once you've updated your password, then that's it. They can't get anything after that point.
Won't there still be stuff lying around that's encrypted with the old password?
No, because we've got a hierarchy of keys, so it's only the bottom one and the bottom, the login bit that you get.
Concern is that the weakest key is the one that's at the base.
So the key that your root, your home directory is encrypted in is not related to your password. It's a random key.
I see. So they would both have to guess my password, and they would have to have saved the block that was my
No,
good
they
key
can't access the block.
encrypted with the derived key.
They can't access the block until they actually have the password. So if they have the password and they log in as you before you change your password, then they could get your root directory's key.
But they have to log in before they get the root directory key.
Correct. And you can also
So
rotate
who's doing
all
that
keys.
check that prevents me from retrieving that thing?
Your home server.
I see. So I am trusting my home server not to give my root object that could be decrypted if you know my username and password to anyone but someone who already knows the username and password.
Correct. So yes, so your home server acts as a rate limiter for login brute force attempts.
So if I have a terrible password and I switch to a good password, but no one retrieved the block when I had the terrible password, then no one can retrieve the block anymore. It
That's
only
correct.
existed on the home server and it's been purged.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's never in IPFS or anything like that.
Yeah, that was my thought. If everything's in IPFS and I can just move to a new home server without the permission of the old home server, how do I stop someone from going through that process and just pretending that I've been doing nothing for 5 years since the day that the password changed? But the answer is that your root block doesn't exist in IPFS.
That's right.
It only exists in your home server.
Yeah.
Does that mean I need permission from my home server to migrate to a new home server?
So you can run a mirror. You can authorize a mirror, and that will duplicate everything you need to unilaterally switch servers.
Okay.
Right, so you
So
can
if I
create a
want,
backup
I
in
might-
case you have a malicious server.
Yeah, and it's more than a backup. It also helps with bandwidth, the bits that are in IPFS anyway.
Oh, how convenient.
Right, but I might want to mirror to, say, a drive under my desk, everything that's on my home server, while simultaneously not serving off of that because it's much lower availability than a good home server would be.
Yeah.
Oh, that would integrate actually quite nicely with the concept from Solid, where they talk about their pods. You could put your backup in a pod. That would be interesting.
And of course, if the PKI refuses to acknowledge the fact that I've changed my home server, I won't be able to change my home server. So that's some minor vulnerability in the PKI system, right?
Correct, yes.
What
Do you have
happens
any idea who all you want to run the PKI system when it does become more of a consortium and less of a just y'all? Probably too early for that question.
Not specifically who, but the usual thing. So you'd want at least 3 independent parties in independent jurisdictions.
Who have no interest in collaborating with each other in any way other than this.
Yeah.
Yes. One of them is in China, one of them is in the United States, one of them is in Russia, and they will never talk to each other again.
And it's because we only rely on the time ordering. If in the future there exists some kind of blockchain that is fast and not bad for the environment and all that stuff, then you could switch to that.
Right, but you would need something in the usernames to indicate which one of the consensus, which PKI you were trying to pull from.
You'd have to agree as a network, but yes, you could switch to that.
Yeah, that's true. If the entire network moved on some date from this system
Right,
to a different system, then you wouldn't need anything as IDs. You just need to know the date.
We just need a consensus algorithm.
Well, yeah, I mean, in that case, you would just need the PKI servers to agree, because they could still continue to proxy requests to the whatever blockchain, but people who knew about the new API could just write directly to the blockchain.
Hypothetically, if we get a blockchain that actually functions.
Yes, very, very hypothetically.
I was going to ask about what happens if I thought my home server was unhacked for a couple months, and then I found out I was wrong, and I didn't necessarily take any precautions. Am I just hosed? I need to create a new identity from scratch or something.
Sorry, say it again. Your home server was hacked.
Let's say
if you find out your home server has been evil for the past year, what do you do?
Yeah, and is there any recourse, or is it okay, well, now anyone could be impersonating you? You have to create a new.
So we generally treat your own server as untrusted, and so the server certainly can't impersonate you. If it's your only copy, then obviously your server could delete your data if you're not mirroring it somewhere else. So yeah, the relevant thing here is depends on what kind of client you're using. If you're using a web client that's served by your server, then obviously they can serve you a malicious web client, and then they've got your password. But you don't have to use that. You can use it. You can log in through any Peergos instance, as in you can run it on localhost and have your server somewhere else, and any writes are proxies of your peer-to-peer streams, so that your data ends up on your home server. If you're doing it that way, then they have no way to backdoor your client even if the server is compromised.
Cool. Yeah, I forgot that it sounds like there's this requirement of what I know that derives my actual key, that even my server, so if someone backdoored my server, even if as long as they didn't know this information that I never write down.
So security requires 2 things: something you have and something you know.
Well, it sounds like you would lose the access control protections, but still have all the encryption protections.
Insofar as they have access to the raw blocks because they're on the server, yes. But we've designed so that it was designed originally when the blocks were still public. So we have quite strong protection even if the server is hacked.
Well, I'm glad there's
you have to have a bad day
public
where you find out your
classes.
server's been malicious for a year and quantum computers got cheap.
Not even quantum computers, because it's symmetric encryption. So.
Oh my.
Oh, I thought the home server had stuff that was asymmetrically encrypted, like your block store, like your root.
No. So we don't depend on privacy don't depend on asymmetric encryption for privacy. That only becomes relevant when you're sharing stuff. So stuff you haven't shared, there's no vulnerability to quantum computers, because it only depends on hashing and symmetric encryption.
So not even if the NSA was running your home server.
Assuming they haven't broken hashing or symmetric encryption, yes.
Yeah. Good luck with that one.
I mean, they're working on it.
I mean, you'd basically have to break pseudo randomness. Like entirely. and then we'd have to like stick like uranium in our computers to like produce random number generators.
Yeah, and if they had broken
Uranium.
that, they wouldn't be.
Cesium's fine. You don't need uranium.
Cesium's fine. A little bit of curium won't hurt anyone.
So where do you hope this app like platform goes from here, and whoever's working on it? Like either what's on the roadmap or what's like a call to action that you would kind of developers would you want to be using this or something?
Yes, how can we help?
Okay. Well, I guess at the moment we're 2 developers and we can't build all the apps people want. If they compare us to Nextcloud, we don't compare. So we'd rather other people be able to write the apps and make it as easy as possible. So that's where we're coming from.
So I mean, what we'd love today is like just try it out, try and write an app, give us feedback, tell us what doesn't work. We've only got 4 permissions at the moment, but that's already pretty capable. But the plan is to add more as we find more use cases.
What is the story around websites that are meant to be public to everyone in the world?
Sorry, say it again.
What if we want to publicly broadcast something over your
if I'm
system?
using Peergos and I want my thing to have some behavior if you have a Peergos account and a different behavior if you're totally anonymous, but still be accessible to someone who's not logged in and doesn't have a Peergos account.
So you can publish capabilities in Peergos, and basically that just means you can make any file or subtree public. And so we use that mechanism already to you can make a folder, you can declare a folder in Peergos.
So you just declare it a public read and then you're done.
Essentially, yes. And publish that capability in your data.
So essentially, you just have a URL which you can then give to someone else, and they'll it'll go back to Picos and render it.
Let's say you're an advocate in some adversarial government, and you want to publish something, but you don't want anyone knowing who you are. How would you do that?
You would create a new account under a pseudonymous name and host it there.
Ah, perfect.
Yeah,
using Tor.
Using Tor or someone else's server, yeah.
Okay.
Or both.
Fair enough.
The other thing we can mention there is that in the profile there is an option to make a folder public, and so if you choose that option, you then have, in the case of Picos.net, you will have username.picos.net. It'll basically just render that as a www root.
Okay. Yeah, so if we basically glue your systems into the other DWeb projects, we've basically solved this then?
I'm afraid I don't know about Solid, but I suspect I need to look it up. Yeah, I see references to it, but I've looked at times, I never understood it enough.
We use it as a case study. IPFS, Matrix, and Solid tend to be our case studies in the Blue Sky group.
Okay, well, hopefully Peergos gets added.
Oh, yeah, we include you in the IPFS stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would look at Solid, especially this, like, I don't know, Peergos feels like a system, I can actually, it's an implementation or something, but I kind of categorize Solid as more of like an API or something that's useful over the wire, but the relevant implementation, for example, lack end-to-end encryption usually.
Well, the end goal is to ultimately glue everything together in a completely permissionless system.
Me too.
So yeah, I think we have similar ideas and vision, at least on some level, to Solid.
Yes.
With probably
It's
the main,
just that they use traditional internet infrastructure.
and the main difference is well what you just said, but also we don't trust your home server.
That's also correct. Yes.
Very cool.
There may be some interoperability stuff there. Maybe message Mark Foster about it.
Oh gosh. Yeah, my advice, or like, I don't know, hope at least would be that maybe since you're only 2 developers, and it can be expensive to like bootstrap your own developer community, that some of the
Yes,
existing demand
that's true.
in the cloud ecosystem, you might be able to like invite, or interest you may be able to invite to.
And that's why we ultimately need to rely on adversarial interoperability.
What do you mean?
Adversarial interoperability is the idea that you glue stuff together. You interoperate with the old legacy stuff, whether they like it or not.
Yeah. And by that you mean
And by that, for example, Matrix does this a lot with like old social media networks, where you can set up a bridge between Matrix and Facebook. Facebook naturally does not like this, but you can do it.
Cool.
And that way, if someone were using Facebook in this chat room and it was bridged, then the Matrix users would get the Facebook messages. And that way you get the network effects of Facebook and Snapchat and Twitter and all of those other groups feeding into your stuff.
Love that. So I have to love drafting, but I'm curious also, is this recorded at all? Like, can I send this to some eager Solid developers and tell them to build on Peergos and watch this, or not?
I don't know. Someone might have recorded it, but you could probably send them. Okay. You. We could probably. You can reach out to Mark Foster. He's a good guy. And he's very interested in this sort of thing. So I think you might have some luck there. He's very active in the Solid community.
I mean, yeah, we had an Austin a few weeks ago, quite a bit.
Yeah, and you have public talks, and those would be very helpful. And I might ask him, because I got a Discord message from him a while ago, so I might be able to reach out.
Yeah, I'd like to have a chat to him as well, so if you can put me in contact.
Sure. I have a Matrix or a Discord.
Discord
which would you like?
works best for me, yes.
Okay. You are in the Blue Sky community chat room?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'll just send a message to the Peergos room.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining. I guess we'll just have to wrap it up right now unless anybody has a question.
No, I think we're good.
We're ready. Okay, thank you so
Just
much.
want to express gratitude for all the time Ian has answered my stupid questions.
Yes. Thank you for letting us harass you for like an hour.
No worries.
Okay.
It's always good.
Cheers. See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.